Story 1. The New Year's Curse, a true account of the 2025 celebrations. I don't even know why I'm recording this. Maybe I just need someone to hear me, to believe me. Whatever the case, this is not a story meant to entertain you. It's not a ghost story you tall tale over a campfire or the kind of thing you laugh about afterwards. This is real. I don't know if I'm cursed or if it's something worse than that, but I know that I'll never look at New Year's Eve the same way again. I didn't go into that night expecting things to end like this. I mean, why would I? Like everyone else, I wanted to celebrate, laugh, and make new resolutions. But what started out as an ordinary evening became something I still can't explain. Please, listen carefully and maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I'll never celebrate New Year's again. It all started like any other New Year's Eve. December 31st, downtown was alive. You could feel the excitement buzzing in the air, people laughing, couples holding hands, the smell of street food mixing with the crisp winter cold. My friends and I were in the thick of it, Liam, Sarah, Jen, and of course me. We had planned to meet at the square under the big clock that striking midnight would mark the start of 2025. Something about the crowd's energy always drew us in. It just made everything feel bigger, louder, important, you know? I remember Jen teasing Liam about his terrible singing voice as the live band on stage started warming up. People all around us were smiling, laughing, and sharing little moments of anticipation. But then, I felt it for the first time. It was like a chill, except it wasn't the weather. It was different, deeper. I was standing in the middle of all that joy, but suddenly I felt like I didn't belong there. And then I saw it. It was just an ordinary glance at first. You're in a crowd, your eyes meet faces here and there, normal. But this one figure caught my attention because it wasn't moving, not even a little bit. Everyone else was laughing or jostling for space, but this person, they just stood there. I wouldn't even say their face was scary. It was more that it didn't make sense. The eyes were perfectly still, but they had this glassy, mismatched quality, like they were staring through you instead of at you. The mouth wasn't quite aligned either, like someone had drawn it a little too high up on their face. I shook off the feeling at first. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was someone wearing a mask or weird makeup. But even if I convinced myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me. Every time I glanced their way, they hadn't moved. Not an inch. When the countdown started, I tried to forget all about it. 10 seconds to midnight and everything came alive. The fireworks lit up the sky, people were cheering, hugging, taking selfies. It was the celebration we'd come for. But in the middle of that joy, it hit me hard, that unbearable cold that didn't belong. And then I saw them again, the figure. But this time they weren't standing still. Oh no, now they were moving, not walking, not running, just sliding through that crowd as though gravity didn't apply. I don't even remember blinking, I just froze, and when the fireworks lit up the square, I swear to you, I swear, their face wasn't their own anymore. It was someone else's. By the time the fireworks stopped, something wasn't right. I started noticing how the people around me shifted. It's hard to explain, but they didn't seem human anymore. One guy bumped into me, and when I looked at his face, his eyes didn't align. Not like lazy eye, but like one was looking up, and the other was looking straight at me. A woman giggled next to me, but her laugh felt off, like it had too many echoes. Even my friends seemed out of place. Jen was glued to her phone, murmuring something under her breath that I swear sounded like gibberish. Liam kept staring out into the crowd, as if he saw something I couldn't. When I nudged Sarah to ask what was wrong, she didn't say a word. Her smile stretched too far, a cartoon kind of grin that no human mouth should make. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was the cold, maybe I was exhausted, but then my friends disappeared. Liam was the first to go. I turned around for just a second looking for him in the crowd, and when I turned back, he was gone. Just like that. No goodbyes, no tapping me on the shoulder, nothing. Sarah went next, then Jen. I called their names, screamed for them over the noise of the crowd. My phone buzzed in my hand, but when I opened it, there were no messages, no calls, just static on the screen, flickering like bad reception. My gut told me one thing: get out. I started weaving through the crowd, my heart pounding. The shadows stretched longer than they should have, like they reached out to grab me. My feet felt heavier with each step, like something wanted me to stay. And then I saw it again, the shadow in the crowd, the shadow following me. It moved the way it always did, gliding, silent and closer. It wouldn't stop. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, to go home, to hide. Somehow I made it back to my apartment. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, double-checked all the windows, turned off the lights. I sat in the dark for hours thinking maybe this was over. The world outside felt still, too still, like the noise, the life, the city. It had all vanished into the same void as Liam, Sarah, and Jen. I crawled into bed eventually, shivering under the blankets, but even then I couldn't sleep. Footsteps, that's what I heard. Footsteps coming from the floor above me. I live on the top floor. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the curtains, I felt relief, as though I'd survived something. I told myself I'd been imagining things, that maybe sleep deprivation or the cold had just gotten to me. But then I walked into the bathroom. My reflection, it smiled at me before I smiled at it. I swear on everything I didn't move, but my reflection did. Its grin stretched too far, its eyes glimmering with something that wasn't me. And then a voice, low, guttural, coming from somewhere inside the mirror itself. Midnight is just the beginning. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. My heart raced, my mind reeling. That's when I saw it again. Standing in the corner of my living room, the shadow was there. It didn't have a face this time, just the outline of a body, but I knew it was watching me. I could feel its grin, even though I couldn't see it. And that's where I am now. This is what I'm trying to warn you about. If you don't believe me, I get it. I know this all sounds insane, but if you ever feel that chill, if you ever see that shadow at the edge of a crowd, do not ignore it. New Year's isn't just another day. Midnight isn't just a number on a clock. It opens a door, and once you step through, there's no coming back. Because for me, and maybe for you, it's not over. None of it is over. Story 2, The Forgotten Resolution. New Year's Day, 2025, dawned like any other new beginning, filled with resolutions, celebrations, and the steady hum of good wishes from friends and strangers alike. My phone buzzed incessantly, messages, calls, and more notifications than my foggy morning mind could handle. Groggily, I scrolled through them, offering half-hearted replies as I sought comfort in my coffee. Then I saw it, a message nestled within the chaos of holiday cheer from an unknown number. Remember your promise? It gripped me instantly. The words were plain yet unsettling. I couldn't recall any promise. Had I agreed to something? If so, why couldn't I remember? I brushed it off as a prank, but the string of words burrowed into my thoughts, gnawing, festering. By the time evening rolled around, I was consumed by unease. I gave in and replied, hesitant fingers typing, "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately, "You'll find out tonight." The words seemed to echo long after I read them, like a spoken threat whispered from a distant corner. Nightfall came too soon, cloaking my home in shadows that suddenly felt alive. I had replayed the message 100 times in my mind, debating its significance, dreading its consequence. Who would send such a cryptic message? And why tonight of all nights? I stayed awake, my living room dimly lit, every creak of the house amplified in the stillness. I kept glancing at the clock, 11:30 p.m., then 11:45. My heartbeat quickened with every tick. By 11:55 p.m., the silence was suffocating. Suddenly there came a knock, a loud, deliberate sound that sent a jolt down my spine. Swallowing hard, I approached the door. My hand trembled as it gripped the doorknob. Slowly, I pulled it open. No one was there. Instead, lying on the ground was a single folded piece of paper. As I picked it up, my breath caught. It was my handwriting. The date at the top read January 1st, 2024, 1 year ago to the day. I unfolded it carefully as though it might crumble under my shaking hands. The message inside chilled me to my bones. If I don't change my ways this year, I will pay the price. Staring at the note, I felt my mind scrambling for answers, like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. I couldn't recall writing this, not even the faintest memory. Yet the handwriting, the tone, it was undoubtedly mine. A flood of questions surged. Had I written this on some drunken night? Was it some kind of resolution penned in jest and misplaced? Or was something more sinister at play? I shut the door, clutching the note, and fell onto the couch. My mind raced. Change my ways? What ways? Pay the price? What price? Each question deepened my dread. The shadows in the room grew longer, darker, as though they were reaching for me. Midnight was minutes away, and each second felt heavier than the last. Then the lights went out. Absolute darkness engulfed me. The hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the heater, all the gentle sounds of my home had vanished. My heart thundered so loudly I thought it might drown out the silence. And then it came, the voice. A cold whisper echoed through the room, chilling the air. Time's up. I froze. The note crumpled in my hand as fear rooted me to the couch. My eyes scanned the darkness, seeking the source. The voice was neither loud nor soft. It was just there, near and far and everywhere all at once. I gave you a warning. The voice was calm, but carried a weight that pressed down on me as if the shadows themselves grew heavier. I clenched my fists, stammering out words I didn't even decide to speak. Who are you? What do you want? The reply was immediate. What you owe. My breath hitched. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Panic surged, but the voice didn't answer. Silence enveloped me once more. When the lights flickered back on, I was alone. My home looked unchanged, but it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted, something I couldn't explain, like the air itself carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I tried to shake it off, comforting myself with rationalizations. Maybe this was some elaborate hoax, a cruel joke by someone who knew me well enough to mimic my handwriting. Yet deep down I knew. The note, the knock, the voice, it wasn't a prank, it was a reckoning. It's been a few days, but the dread didn't leave. I found myself re-examining every decision I had made over the past year. Thoughtless comments, broken promises, selfish choices. It was as though the message had planted a mirror before me, forcing me to face the reflection I had long ignored. And with every passing day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching. I had tried to change, made every effort to do right by myself and others, but the guilt lingered. Perhaps it always will. Yet the voice in the darkness, the cold, whispering presence, it has not returned since that night. I had tried to change, made every effort to do right by myself and others, but the guilt lingered. Perhaps it always will. Story 3, a New Year's Eve, haunting in the woods. Today I want to share a story that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. This happened on New Year's Eve and I can never forget it. It all started with excitement. Like everyone else, I was eager to welcome the new year. My friends and I planned to celebrate at an old cabin in the woods. The cabin belonged to my friend Mike's uncle, and it was a perfect spot for a party. Quiet, isolated, and far from the noisy city. We were a group of 6, me, Mike, his girlfriend Sarah, my best friend Chris, and 2 other friends, Emily and Jake. We packed our bags, got snacks, drinks, and some games, and left in the afternoon to reach the cabin before sunset. The drive to the cabin was smooth, but as we got closer, the road became narrow and surrounded by thick trees. By the time we reached, the sun was setting, and the cabin looked like something out of a movie. Old, wooden, and slightly creepy. Perfect place for a horror movie, Jake joked, laughing. We all laughed too, but looking back, I wish we'd taken that as a warning. The cabin had no electricity, but Mike brought some lanterns and flashlights. The inside was dusty, and the furniture looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Still, it had a charm. We quickly set up our sleeping bags, lit the lanterns, and started preparing for the night. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, we played games, told stories, and laughed a lot. It felt like the best way to end the year. At one point, Chris suggested we tell ghost stories to match the spooky vibe of the cabin. Everyone agreed. Mike started first with a story about a ghost in his school. Then Sarah told one about a haunted mirror. When it was my turn, I admitted I didn't have any ghost stories, so I made one up about a haunted forest. Everyone laughed at how silly it was. Then Emily spoke up. I have a real story, she said. Her voice was serious and it made all of us quiet. Emily told us about an old legend her grandmother used to share. According to her, there was a spirit in these woods, and it would come out on New Year's Eve to search for souls. If someone looked directly into its eyes, they would disappear forever. She said the only way to protect yourself was to stay inside and keep the windows covered. We all laughed nervously, but Emily didn't. "It's just a story," she finally said, but her face showed she believed it a little. As midnight approached, we gathered in the living room with a lantern in the middle. We counted down together. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. We cheered, hugged, and raised our glasses to toast to 2025. That's when it started. We heard a faint sound outside, like someone walking through the snow. At first we thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but the sound grew louder and it was clear it was footsteps, slow and deliberate. "Did someone else come here?" Sarah asked, looking nervous. Mike shook his head. "No one else knows we're here." Chris grabbed a flashlight and said, "I'll check it out." We all protested, but Chris was stubborn. He opened the door, pointed the flashlight outside, and stepped onto the porch. "Hello," he called out. There was no reply. The others stayed inside while I followed Chris onto the porch. The night was eerily quiet, and the forest looked darker than usual. Chris shined his flashlight around but found nothing. "Must be an animal," he said, shrugging. We went back inside and locked the door. We tried to shake off the creepy feeling and continued celebrating, but the mood had shifted. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. "Look!" She pointed at the window. We all turned to see a shadow outside. It was tall and motionless, standing just a few feet from the cabin. The lantern's light wasn't strong enough to show its face, but we could tell it wasn't human. "Is this some kind of prank?" Mike asked, looking at all of us. None of us were laughing. Emily's face turned pale. "It's the spirit," she whispered. "Don't look at it." The shadow didn't move, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Jake grabbed a blanket and covered the window. "We'll be fine," he said, trying to sound brave, but his voice shook. Minutes passed, and then we heard it, a knock on the door. It wasn't loud, but it was slow and deliberate, just like the footsteps. None of us dared to move. "It's testing us," Emily said, her voice trembling. "It wants us to open the door." Mike grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and Chris held onto the flashlight like a weapon. The knock came again, louder this time, then it stopped. We sat in silence, too scared to speak. Suddenly the lantern flickered and the room plunged into darkness. Sarah screamed, and I felt someone grab my arm. "Stay calm," I whispered, though I wasn't calm at all. In the darkness we heard a whisper. It was faint, almost like the wind, but it was there. It sounded like it was calling our names, one by one. "David, Mike, Sarah." "Stop it," Chris shouted. "Who's there?" There was no reply, just the eerie whispering. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Emily started praying, and the rest of us joined her. The whispering stopped, and the lantern came back on. We looked around at each other, terrified but alive. "We need to leave," Jake said. "Now." "We can't," Emily said. "The spirit's outside. If we leave, it'll follow us." We argued, but in the end, we decided to stay until morning. None of us could sleep, so we sat together in the living room, waiting for the first light of dawn. As the sun began to rise, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. The air felt lighter and the sense of dread lifted. We cautiously peeked outside. The shadow was gone and the forest looked normal again. We wasted no time packing our things and leaving the cabin. None of us spoke during the drive back to the city. When we finally reached home, we promised never to talk about what happened that night. But I can't forget it. Even now, as I tell you this story, I feel like someone is watching me. So if you're ever in the woods on New Year's Eve, be careful, and whatever you do, don't look outside. That's my story. Believe it or not, it's up to you. But I'll never celebrate New Year's in the woods again.
Story 4. A chilling New Year's Eve. The night I'll never forget. It was New Year's Eve, and the next day was New Year, and I remember it like it just happened yesterday. I was 15 years old when this creepy thing happened. It's a story I've never told anyone until now because I didn't think anyone would believe me. But now, I think I have to share it. That night, my parents were out at a New Year's party in the city. They told me they'd be back late, so I had the house to myself. I thought it would be fun. I could stay up late, watch movies, and eat all the junk food I wanted. Little did I know, it would turn out to be the scariest night of my life. Our house was pretty big, and we lived in a quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. You know, the boring type. So I wasn't scared at all to be alone. I even felt kind of grown up. It all started around 9 p.m. I was watching a horror movie on Netflix, eating popcorn and laughing at how fake it all looked. The killer in the movie was chasing people in the woods, but it was so predictable. I thought to myself, If this ever happened in real life, I'd be so much smarter than these people. Then the lights flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to make me pause the movie. I looked around, thinking it might be a power issue. It wasn't storming or anything, so I figured it was nothing, but deep down, it felt weird. I decided to check the house just in case. I walked to the front door and made sure it was locked. It was. Then I checked the back door and the windows. Everything seemed fine. I told myself I was just being paranoid because of the movie and went back to the couch. About half an hour later, I heard a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me freeze. It sounded like something tapping on the window. I turned off the TV and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the window in the kitchen. I got up slowly, my heart pounding. It's probably just the wind, I whispered to myself. But as I walked into the kitchen, I realized the tapping was too steady to be the wind. I stood there, staring at the window. The curtains were drawn, so I couldn't see outside. Gathering all my courage, I reached out and pulled the curtain back. Nothing. There was nothing there. Just the dark backyard and the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I laughed nervously. See, Alex? You're just imagining things. But as I turned to go back to the living room, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was coming from the window in the living room. My stomach dropped. There was no way this was normal. I grabbed my phone and texted my parents, but they didn't reply. I called them, but it went straight to voicemail. Now I was starting to panic. I didn't want to look out the window again, but I had to. Slowly, I walked back to the living room and peeked through the curtains. Still nothing. The street outside was empty, and everything looked normal. I decided to turn on all the lights in the house. Somehow, the brightness made me feel a little safer. I also grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet, just in case. I told myself it was probably just some neighborhood kids playing a prank. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. It was around 11 p.m. when things got really bad. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with another movie, when I heard footsteps upstairs. My heart stopped. I knew I was alone in the house. There was no way anyone else could be up there. I turned off the TV and listened. The footsteps were slow and heavy, like someone was deliberately walking around. They seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. I clenched the baseball bat tightly and debated what to do. Should I call the police? Should I go upstairs and check? Before I could decide, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were heading toward the staircase. My blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they were coming downstairs. I backed up against the wall, holding the bat, my hands shaking. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Then I heard a low, raspy voice whisper, "Alex." I nearly dropped the bat. How did they know my name? I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I forced myself to shout, "Who's there? I have a bat, and I'm not afraid to use it." No reply, just silence. And then the lights in the house went out. I stood there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it only made everything look more eerie. I pointed the flashlight toward the staircase. No one was there. I slowly backed up toward the kitchen, thinking I could escape through the back door. But as I reached the door, I realized it was already unlocked. My hands trembled as I locked it again, wondering if someone had been inside the house all along. Just then, I heard the whisper again. "Alex?" This time it came from right behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight, but there was no one there. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the front door, flung it open, and sprinted out into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. I banged on their door until Mr. and Mrs. Johnson answered, looking confused and concerned. I told them what happened, and they let me inside. Mr. Johnson called the police, while Mrs. Johnson tried to calm me down. I could barely speak, my mind racing with fear and confusion. When the police arrived, they searched my house but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there. They told me it was probably just my imagination, maybe a reaction to watching too many scary movies. But I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. My parents came home shortly after, and I told them everything. They didn't believe me either. They said I was just spooked because I was alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. That someone, or something, had been in the house with me. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Was it a prank? Was it a ghost? Or was it something worse? All I know is that I'll never spend another New Year's Eve alone again. And every time I hear a tap on the window, I feel that same cold fear all over again. So, if you ever find yourself alone on New Year's Eve, just remember my story. And whatever you do, don't ignore the sound of tapping on the window.